I never thought it would happen to me. My husband and my best friend cheating. And the worst part, while all of this was happening, I was fighting for my life in a hospital bed. My body was weak, my hands trembling, and every breath felt like a battle. I had spent years carrying Daniel through the worst of his life. Lost jobs, failed dreams, endless nights of doubt and despair, and I thought that loyalty meant something. I thought it would mean he'd be there when I needed him most. But instead, he slowly disappeared. And Claire, the woman I had helped rebuild after her own marriage had crumbled, the one I had stayed up nights consoling, became the person who tore my world apart. My name is Maya David. I'm not proud that it took a betrayal like this to make me reflect on my life, but here I am, lying in a hospital bed, remembering everything that brought me to this moment. I met Daniel 10 years ago at a small art gallery downtown. He was charming, with a crooked smile and eyes that somehow made you feel like he could see the deepest parts of your soul. I was drawn to him instantly, even though my mother had warned me about falling too fast, about trusting too easily. I laughed off her warnings. I thought love would be enough to shield me from mistakes, enough to make everything else fade away. And for a while, it did. We fell in love quickly, passionately, with the kind of reckless devotion that made everyone else roll their eyes. I defended him fiercely to friends and family, insisting that he was worth every risk. And eventually, I married him. Against my mother's careful advice, convinced that love alone could conquer everything. Claire came into my life a few years later, under circumstances that seemed ordinary at first, but became extraordinary over time. We met through a mutual friend, bonding instantly over late-night conversations about work frustrations, family pressures, and the small victories that made life feel bearable. When Claire's husband cheated on her and left her with betrayal and heartbreak, I didn't hesitate. I drove her to court hearings, let her crash on my couch for weeks, lent her money when she needed it, and stayed up late listening to her cries. I watched her rebuild herself piece by piece, and in that process, we became inseparable. She was my confidant, my sister in spirit. I never imagined that she would one day become the person who would shatter me. When I was first admitted to the hospital, Daniel came almost every day. He held my hand, whispered that everything would be fine, promised me that we would get through this together. But over time, his visits decreased. A day would go by, then two, then an entire week. I told myself he must be tired, stressed, or overwhelmed. I clung to the hope that he still cared, that he would show up when I needed him most. Claire came once early on, carrying flowers and a smile that was meant to comfort. I didn't question it. I trusted her implicitly. She had always been there for me, just as I had been there for her. But that single visit was the last time I saw her in my hospital room, before the truth shattered everything. It was my younger sister, Emily, who finally told me what I already feared. She had stepped in to help care for me when Daniel vanished completely. Sitting beside my bed, she hesitated, struggling to find words. Maya, I'm so sorry. I didn't want you to find out like this, but Daniel and Claire, they've been seeing each other. My chest tightened, my heart pounding as if it might stop entirely. I couldn't speak. I couldn't cry. I could only lie there, feeling the weight of a betrayal I never thought possible. Claire, the woman I had carried through heartbreak, the one I had swore would never betray me, had taken the man I had given my life to. Daniel, the man I had defended, the man I had loved against all advice, had abandoned me at my weakest moment. I thought back to my mother's warnings before I married him. She had told me he wasn't reliable, that he would break my heart, that I should be careful. I laughed. I was in love, and love felt stronger than logic or caution. I married him in defiance, believing that loyalty and affection could outweigh any flaw. Now, lying in this hospital bed, I realized how blind I had been. Every sacrifice I had made, every sleepless night, every defense of him to family and friends felt meaningless. My illness had left my body weak, but this betrayal made my soul ache in ways I could not have imagined. Even in the depths of that despair, a quiet ember stirred inside me. Not hope, not naive optimism, but a clarity I had never felt before. They thought I would be destroyed, that my sickness would leave me powerless, but I was still here. My body might be fragile, but my mind, my heart, my determination, they were waking. And as the room hummed with the soft beeps of monitors and the distant footsteps of nurses, I made a vow, silent but unshakable. This would not be the end. It would be the beginning of something else. Something stronger, something inevitable. I remember the way Daniel looked when he first visited me, so earnest, so convinced that he was doing enough. I remember Claire's single visit, so careful, so caring, that I hadn't imagined the betrayal lurking beneath. And I remember Emily's voice, soft but trembling, delivering the words I never wanted to hear. I lay in the bed, every fiber of my being aching, and yet I felt the first stirrings of fire. I had carried storms before, I had held others through despair, and this betrayal, brutal as it was, would not break me. It would ignite me. The night stretched long and quiet. The fluorescent lights above cast fragile shadows across the room. Machines hummed and clicked, the sounds punctuating my thoughts. I closed my eyes and let the tears fall freely, each one a mix of pain, heartbreak, and something else. Something unspoken, simmering, waiting. A reckoning was coming. And when it did, it would be nothing like the quiet, loyal, selfless woman they had once known. It would be stronger, smarter, untouchable. And for now, that was enough. The days after I learned the truth felt endless, a blur of pain, fever, and betrayal. The hospital room became a prison of memories I couldn't escape. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel's smile, heard Claire's laugh, felt the warmth I had given them both twist into betrayal. I was angry, shattered, and sick, but more than anything, I felt invisible. They had vanished from my life when I needed them most, and I realized then how completely they had underestimated me. I spent long hours lying in that sterile bed, letting the machines hum and the nurses move about, their faces kind but distant. My sister Emily stayed when she could, bringing warm blankets, gentle words, and quiet company. She reminded me that even in the worst moments, I still had people who loved me. But what I craved, deep down, was justice, or at least a sense that their betrayal would not go unpunished. I had no money, no power, no energy, but I had something stronger: clarity. And that clarity began to twist into resolve. I began small. First, I took care of myself. Each chemo session, each needle, each lab test became a battle I would win. I forced myself to eat, to walk, to breathe, to remember that my body was mine, even if they didn't care about it. Then I began to think about the life I wanted after the hospital, the life they had tried to steal from me. I remembered the skills I had, the resilience I had built, and the people who had once believed in me. I knew I could start over. A hospital administrator noticed my determination. Mrs. Thompson, a stern but fair woman, saw me organizing my medical records, taking notes, and quietly helping other patients who struggled. She approached me one afternoon, leaning against the doorway of my room. "Maya," she said, "have you ever thought about working with us after your recovery? You have a talent most people don't. You see solutions where others see chaos." I blinked, startled. I had never considered it. My life had been defined by taking care of everyone else: Daniel, Claire, friends, strangers, never myself. But as she spoke, I felt a spark I hadn't felt in months. Maybe this was my first step toward reclaiming control. Once I left the hospital, I began rebuilding cautiously. I took the position Mrs. Thompson offered, slowly learning the administrative ropes. I discovered I had a knack for organizing, leading, and solving problems that others overlooked. My confidence returned, not all at once, but like a fire smoldering under ashes, waiting to ignite. I also started a small online business, selling health-focused items and providing counseling resources for women going through trauma and illness. Each sale, each grateful message, each success reminded me that I was not powerless. I was growing stronger by the day. Meanwhile, Daniel and Claire's life outside my hospital walls was not what they had imagined. Daniel could not hold down a job. Each opportunity he pursued ended in failure, and with every setback, his bitterness grew. Claire, once so composed and confident, began snapping at him over the smallest things. Their arguments became frequent and vicious, each one cutting deeper than the last. They flaunted their relationship for a time, but their facade was cracking, and I heard about it through whispers from mutual friends and even distant relatives. The world they had believed they could control was starting to crumble, just as they had tried to crush me. I never confronted them. I did not need to. I let them spiral on their own, their mistakes piling up while I rebuilt, grew, and strengthened. Every setback they faced, every whispered humiliation they endured in their social circles, made the idea of eventual revenge sweeter, but also more satisfying because it would be mine to craft, precise, deliberate, and unforgettable. I was no longer the woman lying helpless in a hospital bed. I was becoming something far more dangerous in its quietness: untouchable, calculating, unstoppable. I often walked past their neighborhood on purpose, just to feel the sting of their ignorance. Daniel still smiled at people like nothing had happened, but I could see the cracks in his posture, the tension when Claire scolded him for being late or forgetful. Claire, who once leaned on me like a sister, was now scornful and controlling, her smile forced when others were around. Their relationship, which had seemed so perfect, was slowly unraveling, and I was watching from the sidelines, building my own life while they destroyed each other. The turning point came during an evening gala at the hospital, a fundraising event for patient care, an event I almost skipped because I was exhausted. But Mrs. Thompson insisted I attend. She wanted the board and donors to meet me, to see the woman who had not only survived but had thrived against the odds. That night, I walked into the room, healthy, elegant, glowing, and no one could ignore me. Every eye turned as if the universe itself had scripted this moment. And I knew, without a word, that Daniel and Claire would be there. They could not resist witnessing what they had left behind. I watched them enter later, Daniel stiff and awkward, Claire scanning the room nervously. Their smiles were tight, forced, and I could feel their recognition of me before their eyes even met mine. For the first time in years, I saw them not as my world, not as my life, but as obstacles that had underestimated the fire I carried inside. They had thought abandoning me would destroy me. They had thought betrayal at my weakest moment would keep me in a cage. But they had no idea. That night, as speeches were given and applause echoed, I caught snippets of their tense conversations, the whispered complaints, the subtle digs at each other. They were unraveling, exposing themselves to a world that would see them for who they truly were. I stood tall, serene, unshakable, knowing that my time was coming. I had survived illness, heartbreak, and betrayal. I had rebuilt myself from the ground up, and soon the people who had left me in the dust would see just how untouchable I had become. Walking through the gala, accepting praise and congratulations, I felt a sense of power I had never known. Daniel's eyes met mine from across the room, a flicker of something, regret, recognition, fear, passing through them. Claire avoided my gaze entirely, but I knew she felt it too. The weight of what they had done, the truth of my resilience, the quiet promise that justice was coming. And I smiled faintly, knowingly. They had left me for dead, but they had not realized that fire burns brightest after the storm. By the end of that night, I had made another vow, sharper this time, more focused. I would rise higher than they could imagine. I would reclaim everything they thought they had taken. And when the time came, their fall would be spectacular, inevitable, and unforgettable. I had become more than a survivor. I had become a force, quiet, deliberate, and explosive. The day finally came when I knew I could strike, not with anger, not with haste, but with precision. Years of careful rebuilding, patience, and observation had led to this moment. Daniel and Claire had grown careless in their arrogance, thinking I would remain powerless, confined to memories and hospital walls. They had no idea that the woman they abandoned had been quietly preparing, quietly climbing, quietly becoming untouchable. I invited them to a charity gala, not any random event, but one where their world would collide with mine in ways they could not control. It was a fundraiser for the hospital where I had almost died, a night that promised prestige, cameras, and social exposure. Daniel believed it was a casual social evening. Claire, as always, assumed she was untouchable, superior, untouchable because of the man she had taken. Both were wrong. The moment they walked in, I felt the thrill of anticipation settle over me like armor. I was radiant, poised, unshakable. The whispers began immediately. Friends, colleagues, strangers noticing the woman who had fought back from the brink. I had grown stronger, smarter, and no one could ignore it. And I made sure Daniel and Claire felt it first. That night, as speeches were given and applause echoed, I caught snippets of their tense conversations, the whispered complaints, the subtle digs at each other. They were unraveling, exposing themselves to a world that would see them for who they truly were. I stood tall, serene, unshakable, knowing that my time was coming. I had survived illness, heartbreak, and betrayal. I had rebuilt myself from the ground up, and soon the people who had left me in the dust would see just how untouchable I had become. Walking through the gala, accepting praise and congratulations, I felt a sense of power I had never known. Daniel's eyes met mine from across the room, a flicker of something, regret, recognition, fear, passing through them. Claire avoided my gaze entirely, but I knew she felt it too. The weight of what they had done, the truth of my resilience, the quiet promise that justice was coming. And I smiled faintly, knowingly. They had left me for dead, but they had not realized that fire burns brightest after the storm. By the end of that night, I had made another vow, sharper this time, more focused. I would rise higher than they could imagine. I would reclaim everything they thought they had taken. And when the time came, their fall would be spectacular, inevitable, and unforgettable. I had become more than a survivor. I had become a force, quiet, deliberate, and explosive. The day finally came when I knew I could strike, not with anger, not with haste, but with precision. Years of careful rebuilding, patience, and observation had led to this moment. Daniel and Claire had grown careless in their arrogance, thinking I would remain powerless, confined to memories and hospital walls. They had no idea that the woman they abandoned had been quietly preparing, quietly climbing, quietly becoming untouchable. I invited them to a charity gala, not any random event, but one where their world would collide with mine in ways they could not control. It was a fundraiser for the hospital where I had almost died, a night that promised prestige, cameras, and social exposure. Daniel believed it was a casual social evening. Claire, as always, assumed she was untouchable, superior, untouchable because of the man she had taken. Both were wrong. The moment they walked in, I felt the thrill of anticipation settle over me like armor. I was radiant, poised, unshakable. The whispers began immediately. Friends, colleagues, strangers noticing the woman who had fought back from the brink. I had grown stronger, smarter, and no one could ignore it. And I made sure Daniel and Claire felt it first. Daniel's eyes widened when he saw me, that same crooked smile now gone, replaced with a flicker of uncertainty. Claire's posture stiffened, her confident smile faltering. I had made sure to send word ahead. My presence would be the highlight of the night. They had no idea that the woman they had tried to destroy had not only survived, but flourished beyond their comprehension. I spent the evening mingling effortlessly, collecting congratulations, exchanging polite nods with influential figures, and planting subtle seeds of doubt. Every conversation was a calculated display of strength. My accomplishments, my rising influence, my financial independence, all quietly showcased, enough for anyone listening to realize how far I had come. And someone was always there to capture it. Photos, social media mentions, headlines that would spread like wildfire by morning. I watched from across the room as Daniel attempted to approach, faltering as he saw the confidence in my posture, the fire in my eyes. Claire followed, trying to appear calm, but I could see the tension in the way she shifted, the way her laughter lacked warmth. They were no longer in control. They had underestimated me at every turn, and the cracks in their relationship became more visible with every passing moment. Then came the final, inevitable revelation. I had arranged for a short speech, a simple, heartfelt story about surviving illness, rebuilding life, and finding inner strength. As I spoke, the entire room listened, captivated. I spoke of resilience, of loyalty, of the importance of truth and justice. I did not name them. I did not need to. Every person in that room knew exactly who I was talking about. Every word, every pause, every glance was calculated to make them feel the weight of what they had done. Daniel's face turned pale. Claire's lips pressed tightly together. I could see the shame, the fear, the realization that the woman they had abandoned was now more powerful than they ever imagined. The crowd erupted in applause when I finished, not for revenge, but for triumph, for survival, for someone who had clawed her way back from the edge of destruction. And in that applause, I could hear the silent judgment directed at Daniel and Claire, their social veneer cracking before my very eyes. I walked past them afterward, serene, composed, untouchable. My presence alone was enough to dismantle the pretense they had built. I whispered nothing, offered no confrontation, no screams. Their downfall would be social, psychological, and inevitable. Friends who had once admired Claire's composure now saw her arrogance. Colleagues who had once relied on Daniel's charm now noticed his weakness. Word spread quickly. By morning, social media and mutual acquaintances were buzzing. The woman who had survived cancer, betrayal, and despair was thriving, and the pair who had tried to break her were collapsing under scrutiny. But the true triumph was subtler, more personal. Months of careful financial rebuilding had allowed me to purchase a modest property development, a building that Daniel had once expressed interest in managing, claiming he had a vision for it. I had made a quiet, calculated move months ago, acquiring the property under my name. When Daniel tried to approach me with his plans and excuses, I smiled and handed him the keys. With a note. Too late. This one is mine. He could do nothing but stare, the weight of every betrayal he had committed crashing down on him. Claire, too, faced the consequences of underestimating me. Her professional and social credibility began to crumble when mutual friends began questioning her choices, her ethics, and her judgment. The woman who had once seemed invincible now stood alone, facing the ripple effects of every careless decision she had made, all magnified by my deliberate, patient strategy. I did not gloat. I did not need to. Watching them falter, watching the consequences of their arrogance unfold, was satisfaction enough. I had risen from the ashes of betrayal, sickness, and despair to a place where they could no longer touch me. I had become something they could never understand, something stronger than vengeance alone. I had become untouchable. The final moment came quietly, in the most ironic way. Daniel, desperate and humiliated, reached out one evening, hoping for some semblance of reconciliation, or perhaps a chance to salvage his reputation through association with me. I met him calmly, eyes steady, voice measured. Daniel, everything you left behind is still here, I said, but I'm not what you left behind. I'm far beyond your reach now. No argument, no pleading, no tears, just truth. He had nothing to say. He had nothing left. Claire, too, understood the truth without my words. The woman who had leaned on me, who had trusted me, had been outmaneuvered by the quiet strength she never recognized. They had both lost, not because of luck or cruelty, but because they had underestimated me. They had abandoned me, believing weakness could define me. But I had transformed every ounce of pain, every betrayal, into power. And as I stood on my balcony later that evening, the city lights stretching below me, I allowed myself a moment of quiet satisfaction. I had survived illness, heartbreak, and deceit. I had rebuilt my life, reclaimed my strength, and ensured that those who had tried to destroy me could witness their own collapse. The fire inside me burned brighter than ever, a reminder that loyalty, strength, and determination could create justice more profound than any revenge imagined. Daniel and Claire were gone from my life, but their presence lingered as a testament to what I had endured and conquered. I had won, not with vengeance alone, but with resilience, strategy, and an unshakable refusal to be broken. The woman who once lay helpless in a hospital bed had become a force they could never touch. And in that victory, I found the most powerful truth of all. I was unstoppable.